Morning. My name is Andy Bonner. I serve as the chairman of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy. Today is February the 2nd, 2024, and I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy. Notice of the February meeting of the Tennessee State Board of Accountancy, including date, time, location, has been properly noticed, and copies of the agenda were posted to the Board of Accountancy website on Friday, January 26, 2024. Today, individuals who wish to make a public comment on an item listed on the posted agenda during the scheduled public comment period will need to sign on the provided sign-in sheet or by placing their name in a chat box online that we'll be monitoring. It is requested that the comments be limited to 3 minutes out of respect for the other speakers. Karen, would you please do a roll call and so we make sure we have a quorum in the room?
Andy Bonner.
Present.
Larry Elmore.
Larry is present.
Greg Gilbert.
Present.
Sam Bennett. Janet Booker Davis.
Present.
Pam Church.
Present.
David Crenshaw.
Present.
Brad Floyd.
Present.
John Griesbeck.
Present.
Kevin Monroe.
Present.
All righty. Thank you, Karen. Today, I want to start out by welcoming our new board member, Sam Bennett, and say welcome to the board. We're very excited to have you. I think most of the people in the room know you, but I'll give you a moment to tell us a little about yourself and welcome you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start off by saying it's an honor and a privilege to serve on this board and to serve the great state of Tennessee. I bring 23 years of Big Four public accounting experience and currently serve as the managing partner of KPMG's Nashville and Knoxville offices. I also serve as a lead audit partner and have spent all of my career providing audit and risk advisory services to public and large private entities, primarily in the consumer, restaurant, retail, and industrial manufacturing industries. Excited to work closely with each of you and to continue to elevate the profession here in Tennessee.
Thank you. Welcome. Also, would like to welcome our visitors and members of the public that are here today. Welcome. We're excited to see y'all. I didn't think one would show up, but I think you must be feeling better. So welcome. Good to see you. Want to remind everyone that's here today to mute their phones so we don't have any issues with the phones. And also, any of our visitors, please do so. Today we have several people. We actually have 4 board members who are going to be virtually with us. So it's most important that we speak into the microphone. When you're not speaking, mute your microphone. And that way we can make sure that everybody can hear properly and we can get a good recording of what's going on. So with that, we will start today's agenda and just review the agenda items. And our first ones is that we need to adopt Robert's Rules of Order. Do I have a motion for that?
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All right. Karen?
Andy Bonner.
Aye.
Larry Elmore.
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert.
Aye.
Sam Bennett.
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis.
Aye.
Pam Church. David Crenshaw.
Aye.
Brad Floyd.
Aye.
John Griesbeck.
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
All right, our next agenda item is, as we kind of previously stated in the announcements, that the agenda was put out on Friday, January 26, 2024. It states that we are meeting today and that we're at the Davy Crockett Tower, Conference Room 1A. The agenda is before you, and do I have a motion to accept this agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
And Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church, David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe,
All right, thank you. The minutes went out early to the board members. I believe we had a few changes. Those changes then were made, and they were sent back out for review. Or do I have any more comments on the minutes for our last board meeting?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to thank our legal counsel, Neil Stuffer. Neil helped us draft the rulemaking hearing portion of the minutes. If you'll recall, that section of the meeting was quite extensive, and Neil did a great job making it very concise in our minutes. So thank you, Neil.
Any other comments or questions about the minutes of the last meeting? Seeing none, do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
Who?
A second?
Second.
All right, Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett, Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe,
Aye.
Okay. Next is our executive director, Wendy. Wendy is very active in everything she does for our board and our state and even nationally in how she serves with NASPA and volunteers her time there. Wendy, would you give us your executive director's report, please, ma'am?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. This should be on your iPads, and you received it in advance as well. We'll start out with future meeting dates. The ones that have previously been approved by the board are listed there. And then the last one of Tuesday, May 6, 2025 is the proposed date that we're adding there. And we'll vote on that at the end of my report. Just start off with a recap of NASBA meetings that are upcoming. The Executive Director and Legal Conference is scheduled for March 25th through the 27th. That happens to be here in Nashville. And Duke and Neil and I will attend, so that conference is directed towards staff, legal counsel, investigators. So a good opportunity for us to connect with our colleagues there. So excited it's here in Nashville. The Eastern Regional meeting will be June 4th through the 6th in Louisville, Kentucky. That would generally be the one that members of our board would attend. So we will work towards that probably in the next month or two. We do have a budget of 5 board members that can attend that meeting. So if anyone's interested, please let me know, and I'll keep a list there. And then the Western Regional is June 25th through the 27th in Omaha. That is the same agenda as the Eastern. If somebody wants to attend but can't attend the Eastern, we can make arrangements for you to attend the Western, so you can let me know that as well. And then the annual meeting is October 27th through the 30th in Orlando, Florida, and we'll probably talk about that this summer on the individuals that would like to attend that meeting. So this most recent annual meeting was October 29th through November 1st, 2023 in New York, and Andy, Greg, Brad and I attended in person, and Janet and Larry attended virtually. So I think there were some real good sessions there on the use of AI, CPA evolution, which was transitioning at the beginning of the year. Really the point of the conference is to discuss emerging issues and then to acknowledge, really what's gone on over the prior year and instill new leadership at NASBA. And so it was a good event. At the end of the meeting, we did hear from Ken Bishop, their CEO, that he would be retiring this summer. And so they have put into place a selection advisory committee to select his successor. And that is underway now. And Kevin Monroe on our board is serving on that selection committee. So thank you for that, Kevin. And then also another notable item is that Andy Bonner, Chairman Bonner, was elected to serve as treasurer of NASBA at that board of directors meeting just following the meeting. So congratulations to you, Andy. Appreciate that. The CPA exam. I had originally attached here the information I had from the third quarter of 23 with regards to exam performance. And then in my updated email on Wednesday, I had just received the fourth quarter, which I thought you all might find interesting given the transition to the new exam and the individuals rushing in to take the exam. So it does look like to me we had a rush of candidates. It looks like we were up about 17% on those numbers, so that was good. The pass rates with everyone rushing in were not quite as good, and so we did see a decrease of around 7% in the pass rate overall. Interestingly enough, though, the pass rate on audit was up, and so the other sections were down. BEC quite a lot, but I think it's because of the volume that rushed in to take that before it went away. So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if anybody else saw anything on there. We can certainly discuss that, but those were kind of the notable items to me as far as overall candidate population being up and then the pass rate going down, which you might expect with the volume that transpired. The Credit Relief Initiative. At the October meeting, the board voted to authorize a one-time credit relief initiative allowing individuals to who had undergone hardships during the pandemic to request an extension of their credits if they expired anytime between January 30th of 2020 through May 11th of 23. So we identified 375 individuals that were eligible. We communicated with them via email, and we have received and granted extensions to 97 individuals. And so it seems similar to what I've heard from other states. About 20 to 25% of the eligible candidates are requesting and being granted that extension. So the only ones that I denied were folks that did not meet the requirements, like they didn't fall into that time period. Maybe it expired before that time period, or they weren't in our jurisdiction. I had people from other jurisdictions trying to get us to approve their extensions. And so anyone who expired afterwards, I gave them the option of doing our normal extensions where they would provide support, and was able to approve some there as well. So I think it was a good process. And I think we've received the bulk of them. I'll still consider them if they come in. I think I've had one since I created this report. So I think we've received this most amount of them. Communications, we did do a winter newsletter, and that was distributed on January 18th. And all newsletters are available on our website if anybody wants to go view those, and archive is listed there. So contracts, I'm working with the contracts division of the department to update our contract with NASBA for our examination services. And that expires in March. So we are almost complete with that process. So we've been back and forth on the wording on that contract. And then we're also updating the memorandum of understanding with TSCPA for the ethics course, which was discussed at the last meeting. The board had asked that we update that for new signatures since the CEO position has turned over at the society. And so I don't see any issues with that. We should have those complete in the next month. Outreach, the following outreach events have occurred since the October meeting. It's usually a busy time in November and December. Had several events with TSCPA, with their chapter meetings where they allow me to come give an update from the board. We also had some young CPA events. We did a virtual event, which we've been doing about twice a year, where we invite candidates to join us virtually. And I talk about the CPA exam, licensure requirements, and of course, at this time, CPA evolution. So had a couple of those. TSCPA also had a future leadership summit earlier this month, which I attended and provided a similar presentation all of the attendees were in the midst of their education. A couple had applied for the exam and had tested on a couple of sections, so that was nice. We did that one in person. And then I am on the AICPA Board of Examiners and also NASBA's computer-based testing admin committees. So the CBT has had one meeting, and it was really an introductory meeting for the year, so not a lot of actionable items there. The BOE, of course, we have met, I think we've met twice since our last board meeting. And generally we get an update on financials, and we got a lot of update on volume with the CPA evolution and the preparedness for the transition. And I will report that there really have not been any issues reported on the transition to the new exam, which is really nice to hear, that everything seems to have gone as planned. And so that's really good to hear. We do have a BOE meeting coming up here in the next 10 days or so, I believe. So we'll get an official in-person or update from AICPA on that. The next item there is renewals. The firm permits and odd-numbered licensees had a 12/31 expiration date. We did do a series of mail and email notices to folks. And so the chart there indicates kind of where we are with respect to the individuals that have renewed. I had mentioned yesterday that we kind of had a slow start to individuals renewing, but we had a really great December. And really to this date, we're doing well as far as the number of folks that have renewed versus those that are in an expired grace or delinquent status. And so I'm pleased with where we are this year. So that is the information on renewals. And then the rest of the report is performance metrics, which we track internally as far as average numbers of days to license, case and complaint performance, how quickly can we investigate and get cases in front of the board, and then the online adoption rate, how many people are applying for licenses online versus paper. So we've done a good job in all those respects. With regard to the higher number of licensing days in December, that's really attributed to some of those delays in those candidate files we were getting from NASBA. We had people applying for a license where we didn't have the candidate file yet. So we finally were getting those in and being able to process, but that kind of threw the days higher than normal simply because people had applied and we weren't able to approve the license yet. New licenses issued. I think I also mentioned this yesterday. A notable for the calendar year 2023, we only issued 487 new individual licenses, and you'll see for the prior years we've been at 600 or higher. So we were down over 100 new licenses last year. But I think that has a lot to do with some of this delay in getting candidate files and people not being able to apply yet. And we, as I mentioned yesterday, we've had a robust January where we issued 75 new licenses. So hopefully we'll see that kind of level back out. Although with limited score releases this year, we may still see another year where we're kind of down in that number. At the bottom of that page, you have new candidates to the exam. With the updated numbers I received this week, we had 637 new candidates in the calendar year 2023. So that's nice and shows the volume that kind of entered the process as we led up to the transition to the new exam. And then the last page there is our overall licensing population for active status. As of the end of December, we had 11,348 active licensees. Of course, we had a good number still in expired grace at that point who had not renewed. There were 926 in that category, and then 1,508 firms, active firms, but we did have 261 in expired grace at that point. So we were full on at the end of renewal then, so that reflects some of that. So, Mr. Chairman, that is my report. If anyone has any questions, I'm happy to take those.
I'm curious, do you know the number of active licenses now, since you said some of those were still in their grace period? All I'm wondering is, we keep hearing about the pipeline and the lack of CPAs. I'm just curious as to whether Tennessee's experiencing that.
Karen is kind enough at the end of every month to track that. So I will tell you what it was at the end of January 31st. 11,676, and there were still 541 in expired grace status. So we really should be, I think we'll get ourselves above 12,000 again once everybody renews like we expect.
Well, same pattern that we've.
Yeah, we typically will gain about 40 licenses a year. Is kind of the trend I've seen. We're relatively flat. We issue, 500 to 600 a year, but we net about 40 additional each year.
I think one of the most interesting things was on the credit relief initiative, where you said you identified 375, and we came up with 25.89%. And we learned at the last board meeting at NASPA that roughly about 25% of the people were taking it. So it looks like we're pretty much an average there. Any further questions from Wendy? All right. We do have one action item here. Our executive director has recommended that we use Tuesday, May the 6th, 2025 as our proposed future meeting date. Do I have a motion to accept that?
So moved.
Have a second?
Second.
Karen?
Sandy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry, are you with us?
Elmore votes aye. Greg Gilbert,
Aye.
Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye.
All right, thank you. It's my distinct honor to look at the agenda item here next and say that we have with us Dan Dustin, who's also a CPA. Dan serves as Vice President of State Board Relations for NASPA. Dan goes across all state boards and jurisdictions in the nation and talks to their boards and brings them up to date of issues and updates from NASPA. Obviously, right now is a really trying time to where we have a lot of concern about pipeline, about people coming into the profession, and NASPA has taken a very active role in trying to help there. And Dan has done an outstanding job of bringing that information back to the boards. I noticed 4 weeks ago you were in Alabama, and last week was the last week, and because they always post pictures of their board and visitors whenever they come. Boyd does, and so want to welcome you, Dan. Invite you to come up to the microphone here. I know that you've given us some handouts. Be sure and talk plainly into the mic so that everybody can hear you, and welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Make sure you can hear me. I appreciate those kind words. I will tell you, when I visited the Alabama board last week, it was after they did 6 hearings. And the first thing I made sure I did when I sat down was move the respondent tag over to the side so they think I was there for a reason. I'm happy to be back with you. Wendy said I think I was back. I was here in May of last spring, to talk about a few things. And I also want to thank you. A lot of you are involved with NASPA, sitting on NASPA committees, providing your expertise to the many things we do. And obviously, as a membership organization, for boards of accountancy, what you bring to us is very important. And I just can't express enough the gratitude I have for all of your involvement over the years with NASBA. So thank you for that. I did bring a handout today, and I'm going to start on page 3, which is really titled Meet the Task Force. And I want to talk about the task force a little bit. It also has the task force charge. Stephanie Saunders, the NASBA chair for the current year, 23-24, established a task force when she became chair to consider new concepts for CPA licensure that may be included in the Uniform Accountancy Act to update the current licensure model. And as you know, today, the one sole pathway is a baccalaureate or higher degree with 150 hours in 1 year of experience, and you pass the CPA exam. There's been some different iterations. We'll talk about that on how we get to that 150 hours, and I'll explain a little bit more. Task force members include Bob Cedergren, who is the current chair of the Minnesota Society of CPAs, Sue Coffey, who's president of public accounting with the AICPA, and Sue also sits on the AICPA's National Pipeline Advisory Group. Megan Durst, who's a member of the Ohio Board, Accountancy Board of Ohio, and is a practitioner. Steve Grice, who just recently left the faculty at Troy University, but is also involved with a larger accounting firm, Carr Riggs Ingram, in the Montgomery area. David Noble is the chair of the South Carolina Society right now. Nikki Nealon is a at-large board member of NASBA and also chairs NASBA's Uniform Accountancy Act Committee. Boyd Search is the CEO of the Georgia Society of CPAs. Bill Tracy, the executive director of the Texas Board. And Bill has been involved with the International Qualifications Appraisal Board, or IQAB, for a number of years. So he has some experience with respect to international pathways. Ken Bishop, President CEO of NASBA, is serving as an observer, and I'm the liaison to that group. And I also serve on the AICPA's National Pipeline Advisory Group, including their substantial equivalency work group. So a little bit of cross-pollination with Sue Coffey and me. I'll tell you, I not only have calls with the group, as well as the work group, as well as NASBA's task force, but we have staff meetings as well, senior staff of both AICPA and NASBA meeting to talk about the various things that are going on. And now we're talking about possible joint meetings between the National Pipeline Advisory Group and the task force as we try to come into some sequencing and better alignment on some of the things we're talking about. So what is the issue? And you can see on the 4th page that there's a number of issues that the profession is facing today. Obviously, concerns about the large number of baby boomers who are going to be retiring in the coming years. I thought it was good to hear that you generally increase by about 40 licensees per year. I will tell you, I'm a licensee in New York. I originally licensed in New York, but I have a reciprocal license in Tennessee. So I'd be curious, how many of those 40 or the increase are reciprocals versus newly licensed initially out of the box? I tend to see that it is fairly consistent, and I reported on that at the NASBA annual meeting, that we do see a small incremental increase in overall licensees each year when we look at the data from the accounting licensee database. But at some point, we're going to have those baby boomers retiring. We also see a general decline in birth rates. And it's interesting, the Pennsylvania Institute of CPAs recently put out a paper, and they had a chart about birth rates. And you look at birth rates 18 years ago, and they kind of peaked around 2005. And I say 18 years ago because those are the people entering college, and those are the people who are going to become licensees 4 or 5 years from now. And you can see a significant decrease or decline since 2005 in U.S. Birth rates. Also, less individuals are going to college. We hear that people are going to the occupations. Doesn't require the same level of education, examination experience that you do to become a licensed professional. Or they're even just trying to find jobs right out of high school. Part of that impact is certainly the pandemic. Problems with firms and businesses retaining CPAs. One of the things that we heard loud and clear last year, Rick Reisig, the then chair of NASBA, Stephanie Saunders, and I visited with the Minnesota Society. And one of the concerns they had was the inability for firms in the rural areas of Minnesota to hire CPAs and the impact that's potentially having on governmental audits. A lot of cities, a lot of counties need to have audits, and there's not a lot of CPAs in those northern parts, the more rural parts of Minnesota. And we're hearing that in other areas of the country as well. I can remember Kent Absek, the executive director of the Idaho Board, telling me how few CPAs under the age of 30 are in the northern part of Idaho. They're in Boise and other larger cities in Idaho, but when you get to the more rural areas, there are not a lot of CPAs to do the work. So I think we're going to find that throughout the country that younger generations are moving to larger cities, older CPAs, experienced CPAs in those rural areas are retiring. What are we going to do to replace them? The image of the profession, and you've probably heard a lot about this, the work-life balance, the work is boring, lack of advancement, and the relevancy in society. We don't, as a profession, we don't do a good job promoting what we do. Unfortunately, I think social media and the TV does not do us justice with what we do. We're often not portrayed in the important work that we do. And then finally, compensation. It used to be that if you graduated with an accounting degree, you tended to be on the higher end of the salary scale coming out of college. But today, that's not necessarily true. Finance majors, data analytics majors coming out with a business degree tend to make more money than accountancy. So again, the cost benefit, whether it's the time in school, that 150 hours in school, or the return on investment, the actual dollars that you're spending, are some of the things that are concerns to students today. And certainly I think that also goes to the fact that there's been a lot of focus in the profession about the diversity or the lack of diversity in the profession, and what impact does cost, both in time and dollars, have on broadening our representation and be more inclusive of what our society is today. On page 5, we talk about, as a task force, some of the prior discussions we've had. We went back to 2008 and earlier when we adopted the 150-hour requirement, and what was the discussion back then. It was really about broadening the exposure of students, not just technical, but looking at soft skills, communication skills, and things like that. And today it's really focused also on technology. Obviously, a lot of focus on bringing in AI and other things into the practice. How can we enhance that for the folks who are coming into the profession in the early years, and how can they benefit firms? We talked about mutual recognition agreements between other countries, the United States. There was a number of those. And the fact that the model that they use is different than the model we have in this country. And also we talked about some of the recent changes, things like experience, learn, and earn, experiential learning. And the easy model to think about is New Jersey recently had St. Peter's University and PwC, Big Four accounting firm, implement a program of experiential learning. And then the MRAs, and we talked about those also. So why a task force on page 6? A lot of discussion amongst the various stakeholders. We've talked about it at NASBA conferences for the past couple of years. We have the AICPA NASBA Experienced Learner and Earn, or ELE, program to provide low-cost and accredited education after obtaining a bachelor's degree. I will tell you, we are in a pilot right now. We have 30-some students who are registered. I don't have the exact number because we meet biweekly to talk about that program where it's advancing. And Tulane University, who was doing the pilot, had not closed out their registration for the spring semester the last time we met. So I'm hoping to have new numbers in the next week or two when we meet again. But that program has opened up registration for the summer, and we're also going to be looking at opening up registration for the fall semester as well. We have over 200 firms accounting firms that have indicated that they want to have employees go through that program. So that's good, including one national firm that would like at least one person from each of their 65 or 70 offices participate in the program. So there's a lot of interest from smaller firms, which is good as well, because we want to make sure it was scalable for firms of all sizes. Pending legislation is an issue. We've talked in the past at NASBA meetings and in other venues about Minnesota having a legislative bill introduced that would have 3 separate pathways. South Carolina is looking at a possible bill, as well as the Ohio Society. They've kind of pulled back. But the Ohio Society is interesting or the Ohio bill, because right now they have some historical pathways that are not used to a great extent. They have one that says you can have a bachelor's degree and 4 years of experience and get a certain score on a GMAT as a pathway. And they have about 20 people a year that go through that pathway. The other is an associate's degree and 4 years of experience in a GMAT. And we're trying to figure out how, if you have an associate's degree and not a bachelor's degree, why you would take the GMAT, which is to go to graduate school. But they have those pathways in place. And then just recently, in the last month, the Oregon Board of Accountancy, their executive director, indicated that their board will be looking at a possible alternative pathway with 2025 legislation. So a lot of discussion out there about different pathways. The one thing, the final bullet is really MRAs with countries allow non-domestic candidates to become U.S. CPAs with different education and more experience. The models are completely different in Europe. In Europe, you get your primary education, it's 13 years. In the United States, it's 12. And so the college experience is different because it's not as long as it is here, where we tend to have liberal arts and sciences as the introductory courses, and then you sort of start to concentrate on what your major is going to be. There, it's much more technical and not as lengthy. On page 7, I want to talk about the principles that the task force adopted. One was that we wanted to establish an equivalent pathway in the UAA, and that's important. We want something that is going to be viewed as the equivalent to the current 150 hours plus 1 year pathway. We also, as is the case with all boards of accountancy, we want to protect the public interest. We also adopted the 3 principles that we started with the Experience, Learn, and Earn program. They wanted it to be cost effective to the candidate or the student. We wanted to maintain rigor, having minimum competencies for a newly licensed CPA, and we wanted it to be scalable so that it was available to firms of all sizes. And we also talked about time frames, and this talks about a minimum time frame to complete. We're talking about maximum time frames. Nothing is in stone right now. We're hearing a lot of feedback from a lot of different constituent groups, stakeholders. So we're still looking at that and developing ideas and establishing an evaluation process to assess one who has completed the program. Page 8 is the same as page 7. My apologies. I had a duplicate as I pulled this deck together. Page 9 gives you a schematic of today's model. And it breaks down roughly into a baccalaureate degree plus a master's degree. You take the exam, you get 1 year of experience, and become licensed as CPA. The other alternative is you have a bachelor's degree and you get your 30 hours. And you can see down below there in black, it's not too easy to read, but there are things like the Experience, Learn, and Earn program, or the experiential learning model I mentioned, or it's flexible. Students will go out and take their own coursework to cobble together getting to the 150 hours. You still take the exam, you still get your experience, you become licensed as a CPA. There are obviously some concerns from some boards of accountancy with respect to that flexible 30. You will hear different scenarios of how people get that. One of the interesting ones to me is that some jurisdictions are having applicants take FEMA coursework, the Federal Emergency Management coursework, for up to 30 hours. And I often say that's great if you live on the coast, or if we're in the middle parts of the United States where we have tornadoes periodically or hurricanes on the coast. It helps from that standpoint, but I don't know that it actually helps with entry level into the profession. So, you know, we're hoping to find something that adds value for the individual as well as the firm moving forward. The next slide, 10, talks about real issues. And Ken Bishop talked about these at the annual meeting. The inability to hire CPAs, particularly in small firms, a shortage of auditors, CPAs leaving public practice, and the shortage of new CPAs entering the marketplace. We said, well, boards of accountancy, you know, don't have a significant impact on hiring or the shortage of auditors in rural parts of the United States or any part of the United States, or those who choose to retire at any point in time. But we could have an impact on new CPAs entering the marketplace. On the next slide, we talk next couple slides really talk about the mutual recognition agreements. Slide 11 talks about the fact that individuals who go through the MRA process have to have a credential issued by the licensure authority in their country. It entitles the holder to issue financial statements, and it's issued based on education, exam, and experience requirements established by that foreign licensing authority or by law. And then IQAB, the International Qualifications Appraisal Board, determines compliance with the UAA. And if you've been to any past NASBA meetings, periodically we have renewals or signing ceremonies where we'll have dignitaries from the other entity come to our meetings, and we'll have Barry Milan-san, the present CEO of the AICPA, come, and we do a ceremony where we formalize those agreements. If somebody applies, a foreign licensee applies through an MRA, they typically have to pass the IQEX exam, the International Qualifications Appraisal exam, which is the reg section of the Uniform CPA exam, which tests things like knowledge of code of conduct and taxes and things like that. So things that would be more unique to the United States than someone would have just as a foreign licensee. Next slide, on slide 12, talks about education evaluation. And digging a little deeper, IQAB evaluates the education to verify it's equivalent to the UAA requirements. Foreign education models differ, as I mentioned. There's no focus on accredited education. And accredited education is really something that's unique to the United States. There are different ways that education meets a standard in foreign countries, but accreditation is really a term of art for us. Dozens of CPAs have been licensed under the MRAs over the years, and generally it's more of an input to the United States than it is U.S. CPAs going to foreign countries, because there's a need and a desire to come here to become a CPA. And then those pathways have no impact on substantial equivalency or mobility. Once you become licensed through those pathways, if I applied under an MRA to New York and got my New York license through that MRA, I'm now licensed as a CPA in New York, and I can practice through mobility in any state in the country. So the next slide is really a high-level overview of the thought of a structured professional program, and that's the term we're using for the concept that we're talking about, the SPP, or Structured Professional Program. It's interesting, we are a profession that loves our acronyms, and if you go to a NASBA meeting, I think we have about 4 pages of acronyms in the back, And so we have SPP. You may hear that sometimes with Structured Professional Program. The only place I haven't been able to find an acronym yet is the Professional Licensure Task Force. We haven't come up with one for that, but with the ACPA's National Pipeline Advisory Group, you'll hear it referred to as NPAG. So there are a lot of acronyms being thrown around. Page 14, what might qualify in a structured professional program? We've tossed around a little bit. Should this program focus on the disciplines of the profession as well as business and industry? Do we look at things like audit and attest, financial reporting, tax planning and prep, information systems and controls? Sounds a lot like the focus of the exam, that we have those core accounting and tax areas, and then we have those specialties in the discipline. And there's been some discussion about that. There's been discussion of developing experience rubrics based on defined competencies. And the experience rubrics really goes back to some of those experiential learning models like the St. Peter's PwC model. I believe there's other firms that are looking, and other boards are looking at things. I know I've had some inquiries from the Illinois Executive Director, the Illinois Board of Examiners, which does the pre-licensure. They have a model that might be constructed there. And there's other states that some of the larger firms are starting to say, could we partner with a college or university in your state and have a program similar to PwC and St. Peter's? The one thing to consider when you have those models is it's one large firm in one school. So it's not scalable to firms of all sizes. It's really dedicated. The PwC St. Peter's model last year was piloted with 6 individuals. And the firm paid the full tuition rate for St. Peter's for those 6 individuals. So that would probably make that model cost prohibitive for small and medium-sized firms who just can't afford to pay tuition rates. One of the other things we talked about was what type of experience might qualify. We talked about military experience. We talked about certificate programs, formal staff training programs, and both accredited and non-accredited programs. The thing that I found interesting as we've had some discussions is that a lot of firms do have formal staff training programs, either internally if they're larger firms, or they may utilize things like the AICPA staff training programs, or they may use things, I think the other one is Thomson Reuters, has something called Audit Watch and Tax Watch. So new hires coming in have the ability to go through initial training. And one of the things we're hearing from practitioners is that a lot of times students coming in have to go through some remedial training to get up to speed with the software the firms are using or the mechanisms by which the firms conduct their practice. So we're talking about, could some of that formalized education apply in this program? And that list is evolving. Again, there's nothing cast in stone. We're looking for feedback and reaching out to stakeholders. And I would say that's one of the things that if there's a takeaway from CP Evolution, and I was involved with CP Evolution for 5 years, was the value of communication and input from the stakeholders, whether it was the boards of accountancy or the state societies or AICP NASBA committees, other stakeholders, the education community. There was a lot of feedback, and I think too here we benefit from hearing that input from various stakeholders. Slide 15, developing and defining competencies. Some of the things that came up included, Board of Accountancy defined competencies. And if you were to go out, and I can share these with Wendy if you're interested, there are some boards now that require a portfolio of experience as part of the licensure requirement. The Oregon board has 4 pages of regulations that talk about competencies, and they're actually going through the process now of possibly removing that because they recognize that under the current model, it's rather it takes a lot of time to do that work. But they've gone through the process of identifying competencies, so why not look at that? Nevada's another state, historically highly regulated because of the gaming industry. And so they have some pretty rigorous competency requirements as well. Other things we're looking at is the CP Evolution Model curriculum that was released about 2.5 years ago. A lot of work with 6 teams looking and pulling that together, and then shared with a lot of people for input. The ACPA's pre-certification core competency framework, the ACPA's competency framework, and possibly even the exam blueprint. I'll tell you, my perspective is we already have the exam as one of the 3 legs of the stool. So do we necessarily want to tie the structured professional program to exam competencies? But maybe some of those other things are worthwhile to look at as we continue to evolve this idea. So how to measure competency, formalize coursework, learning and training modules, all things we're considering right now. Page 16 is really the possible future model. And again, what we're talking about is equivalent models in the Uniform Accountancy Act. So it would be amendment to the Uniform Accountancy Act, and that would only occur through exposure for comment to the boards of accountancy. And you can see down there at the bottom, it just adds that third piece, a baccalaureate degree, completion of structured professional program, CPA exam, including experience, and then you become a licensed CPA. Next page, page 17, substantial equivalency and mobility. Been a lot of focus about, well, if you change the model, what happens with substantial equivalency? And the easy example for me would probably be to use one of the states that has a legislative proposal now, and I'll talk about that in a second. But there's been a lot of interaction with stakeholders about maintaining substantial equivalency mobility as best we can. And we've done some research. John Johnson, Director of Legislative Affairs, and I have done some deep dives over the last couple of weeks with respect to all the jurisdictions, substantial equivalency laws, and what the impact of a change might be. This says 9 jurisdictions require 150 hours education in state law for substantial equivalency and reciprocity. It's actually 13. As we went through and revised this, we found a couple that actually had 150 hours hardwired into their statute. And essentially what those statutes say is that an individual can come from a substantially equivalent jurisdiction. However, they need to also meet either the 150-hour education requirement or they need to meet the licensure requirements in our act. And so they can't simply acknowledge another pathway as the UA is written. They actually have a specific recognition of 150 hours. So there would have to be some changes there. And then a discussion of would mobility be interrupted to some extent during a transition. So one of the things I'll go through this fact pattern in a second. One of the things we talked about is that if we did change, there could be interruption. But if you think about if a jurisdiction adopted a new equivalent pathway today, it's still going to be 4 and 10, 5 and 10 years down the road. There are some jurisdictions that will say if you have a license in another jurisdiction, we'll give you a license today. So it's essentially a 1-year requirement. But a lot of jurisdictions already have a 4 and 10 or a 5 and 10. So potentially there is some time in order for boards of accountancy, state societies to work together to implement and amend their statutes. So it's not like all of a sudden it's automatically broken. So the fact pattern was the UA is amended with an equivalent path. So as I showed on that earlier slide, State A amends its statute to coincide with the equivalent path, and as a result is determined to remain substantial equivalent. That's the importance, maintaining substantial equivalency, either recognized by the boards or recognized by their designee, which tends to be NASBA's Qualifications Appraisal Board. And the NASBA Qualifications Appraisal Board is the Uniform Accountancy Committee. 8B has not recognized or enacted the statutory change, but if State B had adopted Section 23 language in the UAA, it basically says that under mobility, because State B has met the requirements, any CPA from state B could practice, I'm sorry, any licensee from state A could practice in that state under mobility and substantial equivalency. So I looked at your statute, and I'm not an attorney, and sometimes I put that hat on a little bit to do some interpreting, but obviously it's up to your board counsel and you to make your interpretation. But when I looked at yours, it said determination by the Board of Accountancy that the 3 E's, education, experience, and examination, are comparable to or exceed the 3 E's in the chapter. So we're talking about creating an equivalent pathway in the UAA. So it would be up to the board to recognize that pathway as being equal to or exceeding. So that I think is hopeful, and there's a lot of that across the country, that language. So I want to close. The last slide is really focused on the concept exposure that was released in late December. And it's out for comment. We released this to the boards of accountancy and other key stakeholders, including the state societies. Anybody we would issue an exposure draft from the Uniform Accountancy Act, we sent this to, because we wanted to make sure we got broad input. And you can see the question that we asked was, do you believe that the Professional Licensure Task Force should continue to focus on discussions on an equivalent path to licensure that defines a structured professional program that would qualify an individual for licensure as a CPA? So we've had that out, as I said, for about 5 weeks, and we continue to get feedback from state societies, from boards of accountancy and others with respect to, is this something we should consider and continue to build out? And we're going to continue to do that as we go through the process, continue to have discussions with stakeholders. Stephanie Saunders, NASBA Chair, and I actually have a meeting on Monday morning with a leadership group from AACSB, accrediting organization, to talk about this. There are AICPA has met with the major firm group, which is the top 100 firms, less the big 4 accounting firms. They've talked to the G400, which is the next 400 size firms, talked to PCPS, professional. I won't tell you what that is because it's off the top of my head. I don't remember what PCPS is, but it's the smaller firms. They're doing that outreach. They, at their council meeting, have had discussions and done some workshops to solicit some tabletops back in November or October. SEA, which is the leaders of the state societies, had discussions, and they're going to be meeting in mid-February to have more discussions. We had our webinar on January 8th. We spoke yesterday, Stephanie Saunders and I, and some others talked about, are we going to be at a point where we might do another webinar in early March? And thinking about it, Stephanie's a tax practitioner, that I'll probably move that to March 16th or after to give her a break. And then we're also going to talk about it at the Executive Director Legal Counsel Conference at the end of May. AICPA's National Pipeline Advisory Group has a deadline of getting some things together for the AICPA Spring Council meeting. So we're trying to address as much as we can the issues that we're hearing, the feedback we're hearing, and trying to continue to better define. If there was one thing I heard on January 8th is, it's a great idea, but the devil's in the details. So can you tell us more? In the NASBA Board of Directors, I guess 2 weeks ago today, met, and they unanimously said, yeah, let's continue down this pathway of looking at this idea and what the impact may be and how it might help the pipeline moving forward. So with that, Mr. Chair, that completes what I had to say about where we are with Professional Licensure Task Force. Be happy to answer any questions you or the board may have.
Thank you very much, Dan. Some great information there. I was just going to ask for a double down to say in the ELE, the 30 hours there in the structured program, would that be, I know ELE right now is where a diploma would be issued. and you would also have a transcript. So just to make sure everybody's on the same page, how would that be different under the SPP?
So just for clarity, an individual going into the Experience, Learn, and Earn program, or ELE, would have graduated from college with a baccalaureate degree. So the ELE program itself is not issuing a diploma. What it is doing is allowing the individual working with their employer to identify coursework that would be of value to them in taking that coursework to get to the 150 hours. So today, we hear a lot about most people graduating with a bachelor's degree have more than 120 hours, either because of advanced placement or coursework they've taken. Perhaps they did an internship over the summer, and that's part of their transcript. The important thing with ELE is that it's not an accredited transcript. And what we're talking about with this structured professional program is it wouldn't require the cost of going to college and paying a per credit hour cost, even of $150 a credit hour. We have not identified, costs at this point. I've thrown some numbers around, but there's nothing cast in stone that equates to like 150 hours per credit hour. The other thing that with ELE, it is given it's not given through the business school at Tulane University. It's given through their executive program, which draws upon faculty from throughout the university. Some of the benefits are, one, the student doesn't have to maintain a minimum GPA to participate in the program and go through an evaluation of their transcript to participate in ELE. And that saves cost and it saves time. It is on an accredited transcript, regionally accredited, not on an AACSB accredited, the way the accounting program at Tulane is. So it does meet the criteria that are in effect today.
Microphone.
You probably don't want me to share all of it, but I sent Wendy an email after watching the webinar and really feeling very strongly about it. And she tells me she has shared that with Dan. Basically, I think our profession is working really hard to pretend we're not doing away with the 150 hours while doing away with the 150-hour requirement. For years, I have studied and done a couple of presentations about what we're filling the extra 30 with. So I guess I will say I was the director of a small school's Master of Science in accounting professor for years. I retired after 32 years there, and now I'm dean of a school of business at another small school. But I've been in the profession long enough that I remember the white paper that created the 150-hour requirement, and the purpose was to say, please get a broad education before focusing on your technical courses later. So they wanted people well educated. It seems that we're just now trying to fill up the extra 30 with whatever we can. And I have been concerned for the past 7 years that the extra 30 is often filled with up to 12 hours of doing a CPA review course where you pay the CPA review provider and then you pay for tuition to get that on a transcript. So there's 12 out of the 30. We now have very long internships, but at the end of the education, so it's really your first 6 months of experience, but we're giving transcript credit for that. Now I hear all sorts of other things that are being given credit for that. There was even one report from a Pathways Commission that praised giving credit for passing the CPA exam. That's not what 150 credits should be. I didn't support the ELE the way it was written because we're taking the extra credits and saying, oh, don't take them in accounting or data analytics. Well, some of it's data analytics, but take it in the soft skills. Again, not the purpose of the 150. Beneficial, yes. Now, do you hear how complex this is? Before this 150-hour requirement, the Tennessee rule was an undergraduate degree plus 2 years of experience, or a graduate degree with 1 year of experience. I like that a lot better than this complicated model that sets up some sort of oversight, possibly even has to approve which firms can participate. And of course, I also think of the schools. When you set up the ELE with only right now Tulane participating, you took all other schools out of the mix. I will say I've read a lot about softening the transition from high school to college and college to workplace, particularly for underrepresented groups. This speaks about that somewhat. In the webinar, they spoke about that. But it's not enough. It's so complicated that I don't think you're helping these people. So I just don't understand how we've come this far in creating this complex model, but we're acting like we're not undermining the 150 credit model. I also think that we in other states really kind of stripped the meaning of the extra education when we said it's okay to sit for the CPA exam as soon as you get your undergraduate degree. And we do that. I can tell you as a professor that the student's focus then shifts to passing the CPA exam, not to getting true graduate education. And also, you wreak havoc with schools as they try to design their curricula, because as soon as that was done, you had to push the technical courses back down to the undergraduate, which is where they've been removed from when we went to 150-hour credit. So I could say a lot more, but I would like to ask you, what's wrong with the undergraduate plus 2 years of experience with a CPA or master's degree or 150 hours with 1 year? Why not just that instead of all the planning and programs and oversight?
I hear you about complexity, and it's not defined yet. And so what you heard on January 8th continues to evolve. And we discussed a different idea yesterday that focused on competencies and how we get those competencies without being an onerous process, because we recognize that it cannot be onerous either for firms or in business and industry if we truly want it to be complexity, or a model, at least the model that was spoken about on January 8th. At that time, the task force had only met twice. It was established, met in November, it met in December, and we wanted to follow through with our commitment to communicate early and often. And so we shared, the initial ideas and thoughts of what was happening, and that has continued to evolve in the last 3 weeks since that meeting. What's interesting about the undergraduate 2 years is that the models that are being proposed today do not take into account what occurred prior to 150 hours. The models that are being proposed today are essentially adopting the experience like the 150 hours, that you only need 2 years of doing anything, and that qualifies for experience. And I think what we're trying to do is say there's got to be some sort of structure around that. And the easy one, and it's farcical in a way, is that just because you're the bookkeeper for the car wash and you're counting quarters out of the vacuum machine, that is not qualifying experience for licensure as CPA. There's got to be some minimum competency threshold there. So there's concern about that. What we're trying to do is tie it to the minimum competencies of a licensee. And when you think about the feedback we're hearing from firms, that individuals graduating even with 5 years don't meet the necessary competencies to go to work in a firm, we're trying to figure out how to have better qualified people in the workplace and available. And at the same time, broaden it and recognize that cost, and I mentioned this, cost either time, that 5th year, and then you look at, well, what's the return on investment? I'm going to school for a 5th year, but I'm making less money than if I graduated in finance with a 4-year degree. And then in data analytics and some others. So we're trying to recognize what's changing in society and in the marketplace because we have to evolve. It's interesting. As a member of the National Pipeline Advisory Group Substantial Equivalency Task Force, we had a presentation by Mike Armstrong, who's the CEO of NCARB, which is the NASBA entity for architecture. And architecture is, again, lower birth rates, lower graduation rates. We're competing with architects, other professions, and occupations for students. They are actually going way beyond where we are, that they're actually looking at a baccalaureate degree plus a program plus the examination and experience. They're looking at a baccalaureate degree without having that concentration, getting the exam. They're looking at an associate's degree and experience in the exam. And they're even talking theoretically about high school graduates. So there's a lot of movement amongst the licensed professions about how we address fewer people overall in the pipeline, and then how do we attract them, certainly to the public accounting profession. I hear you. I think the other point I would make, if you've been around for a while, and I talk about pre-pandemic, and you think about what was being said in 2017, 2018, there are people saying, we have 150 hours and 1 year experience. 1 year experience isn't enough. And so I'm trying to go to in my own mind say, well, if it wasn't for the pandemic, we'd probably still be having this discussion of 1 year of experience, 150 hours is enough. And so I struggle then how does just doing the same model, 120 hours in 2 years, how does that equate as enough too? So that's only my personal opinion. There's 11 people, 10 people on the NASBA task force. There's 10 or 11 people on the Substantial Equivalency Task Force of NPAG, and a lot of other people with a lot of great ideas. And we're just exposing this concept. There's nothing cast in stone. We're just trying to get ideas and see how we can possibly improve the pipeline going forward.
Chairman, may I ask a question if we have a few minutes? Dan, first, thank you for being here today, but also thank you for the months and years of preparatory work to kind of get to the point where we can lay out this presentation. I think echoing a little bit of what Dr. Church said in your comments earlier, I think you mentioned that part of the constituent groups that we have been meeting with have been inclusive of those representing the AA CSB accreditation body. And, I guess that probably represents maybe the top 6 to 10% of colleges that have that accreditation, but there are an awful lot of colleges that have single A accreditation and so forth. And so, we're getting the problem, once they graduate, at least from an undergraduate degree, in terms of demographics that you alluded to, they, meaning the colleges and universities, are getting it even earlier than we are. Because they're facing enrollment declines, not just in accounting, but in general because of the same demographics that you cited. And so I think the concern or question that I would have is just making sure that we're cognizant and sensitive to the effects of significant changes on our part, at least with respect to either baccalaureate or graduate level degrees on business colleges and universities of varying degrees and sizes, and particularly for those with smaller programs, because Dr. Church is exactly right. I mean, we saw a lot of movement toward making that MAC program basically a CPA examination preparation process in terms of the hours and types of credits that are being granted, for better or worse. I mean, there are pros to that, but there are also cons to that. And I'm not sure that's in keeping with the original dream of the 150-hour visionaries that instituted this process. So my only caveat is let's remain open to the impacts, particularly at the brick and mortar schools that are also fighting for their demographic lives.
And offer really good mentoring to these very students who you say lack some soft skills. I think you develop those skills a lot better at a brick and mortar school than you can in online courses. There is a place for online courses, but we don't want to preserve programs that are no longer relevant. That's not what we're saying. But when we heard about the ELE at my school, we said, wow, we'd be perfect for that because we are so hands-on with our students. But so we were disappointed that it wasn't going that direction. But that's our perspective. I understand that. But I think you have to consider the student's whole experience and what you're giving up with some of these.
Evan, if I go back to your comment about the possible changes and the impact it has, we've had some informal conversations. It's interesting. Somebody who was on a AACSB accreditation visit, speaking with deans of schools, and unsolicited said, that looking at 120 versus 150 may be a benefit in that they may lose some students in the MAC program, or Master of Tax program, but they envision that it's going to mean more people coming in to the undergraduate accounting program. And, that's a handful of people, 2 or 3 people that are saying that. At the end of the day, though, if it means more people into the academic pipeline, then hopefully it means more people staying in that pipeline to graduate in accounting and hopefully get start a career in public accounting. And hopefully it's in a public accounting firm, because that's where we certainly need people today, especially in the audit area. With those.
Dan, and I guess I just add, I just appreciate that we have caring and thoughtful people such as yourself that are grappling with this issue and contributing those thoughts and leadership. And I'm not sure where this will all end up, but I also know that we're not alone. And I think with people of goodwill and good intent, hopefully we can find a way.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Sir.
Dan, appreciate your hard work and overview. Very, very informative. I guess one question I had was just if one of the primary purposes of the initiative is to increase candidate pipeline, increase accessibility to underrepresented students, I guess how is NASBA or the task force or others, how are you evaluating, what potential impact on, those two areas, things like ELA, SPP, 4+2, like how do we go about evaluating what that potential impact might be? Because I don't think, I heard, discussion around evaluating, candidates that go through a pilot, but that's such a limited population. To me, it would seem, some sort of a study or survey on recent graduates who just came through the traditional path and understanding what would their interest have been in, one of these alternative paths, and surveying the profession of people who have recently gone through it, and also potentially surveying or studying others who did not choose the accounting path, who might have chose related paths such as finance or chose, some other study within the School of Business, just to understand, like, would any of these other potential pathways have made an impact in their ultimate decision, to study accounting or not study accounting? Because I think to some extent, it seems like we're making, we're making some judgment calls on whether some fairly substantial changes that do seem fairly complex to monitor would or would not have the impact that we ultimately hope it would.
A couple things. We're doing CP Evolution, again, 5 years in the making. Just launched did surveys throughout that process of students, the student population, gathered information. The Center for Audit Quality, CAQ, again, another acronym, the Center for Audit Quality has been doing deep dive research with respect to high school students and really focused on ethnicity and diverse pipeline, and have come up, and they've done some partnerships too with some organizations to try to attract people to the accounting profession. So there's been a focus on that, and there is some data that we've evolved over time. One of the things that the National Pipeline Advisory Group is doing, it has six work groups. One of those work groups is a national survey, and it's being piloted right now. And I think by April or May, we'll probably all get an invitation to participate in that far-reaching survey. It's going to talk everything from high school, middle school, right through entry-level, first early years in the profession. Talks about DEI initiatives, that focus as well. One of the things that they're also doing, I believe in February, they're going to be surveying students separately because they want to gather that input as well. So both groups are focused on data-driven, informed decisions. Unfortunately, I don't have it with me. I brought you 15 or 16 slides, and I've instead have my folder that's about 4 inches thick if I brought everything with me. But we're certainly doing that work. I'd be happy to come back and share that with you at some point.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Dan? Dan, we just appreciate everything you're doing. We appreciate the task force. We know that, I personally know that at the board meeting, we had a lot of even harder in-depth questions as a board, and was very excited about some of the comments or statements that we heard there at that meeting to indicate that the task force was really moving forward and considering a lot of those already.
Continues to evolve.
Right. And so I love the fact that we're looking at it. One of the things that from my viewpoint was very important was during COVID to have that mobility. I know that our profession was really a lamplight at that point for other professions to say, hey, we've missed a boat here. We've got to consider mobility because we don't know what's going to happen. And so we didn't have to jump through hoops as a profession like other professions did. The other thing that's very exciting is that we all know from public practice, and specifically me, that as students were coming out of college, that they weren't prepared at that point. Even in the firm that I was in, we had educational training, mentorship, and we helped develop those students because they were not prepared yet, or those graduates, I should say, but they were not prepared yet to really to give us true value in public accounting. I know that in talking to some of the big four individuals in the profession that they kind of do the same thing. And a lot of things that were said that you presented were, maybe we haven't done a good job in the profession of paying up for that because the other factors being that if somebody can get out with 120 and make more than somebody's getting out with 150, it doesn't make any sense in the world why somebody's going to take that route. But I am excited about the diversity because we've had a really tough time getting students to come into the field because of the fact of the extra cost. And I think that really is a tough kind of block at the end of that extra, especially when you have to make that decision as an incoming freshman. I mean, that's tough. Of course, as a company, I haven't been able to use the ELE, but I will tell you that we have a young individual that works at the bank that had 120 hours. We encouraged him to go back so that, because we really feel like the CFO of the bank should have a CPA degree. We encouraged him to go back. He took it virtually at the bank. We gave him time. He would drive to the university to take the test and come back, so we gave him that time off. And the mentor program really worked at the office level. I was able to share with him, my experience in tax and audit. I was able to share with him my experience in banking. And this young person has really developed at another level. He's already got 2 sections of the exam passed and actually is sitting for the next 2 sections. And I think he's already set for one in January, and he's setting for another one in February. And so, it's really exciting to see the level of thought process that he was at and the level of thought process he is now while he's looking at data in front of him. I don't think that we did a good job personally here again in college of applying the mechanics, because we put people in groups and said, here, you all go work together as a group and understand this. When you're in a bank environment and we're talking about specific issues and then pulling it up on the screen and going through it, it really makes a big difference in their education. And I right now would put him against any auditor coming in at a staff level and say that he's far advanced of the knowledge of what's going on because of the fact he got that on-the-job experience education. So I'm a true believer that there is value there. And I'm excited to see how NASBA and AICPA are addressing that and bringing possibilities back to the table. And I appreciate you coming here and talking to us today about it.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are right at 10 o'clock, and we've got a couple of committee reports and then some NASBA updates. And why don't we take a short break, a 15-minute break here, and then we'll come back in. All right, thanks. All right, welcome back. Next, we have on the agenda the board committee reports. We got Chair Monroe, and you led us in a lively discussion yesterday, and so we'll go ahead and get started on enforcement.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the Enforcement Committee, yesterday we covered basically two items. One is the case and complaint summary report, which details the open complaints, excluding those that we're about to discuss in the legal report, with respect to both individual CPAs and firms, as well as the complaints opened by year. So that was an informational item that we reviewed. The second item was the actual legal report, and that is comprised of cases in 3 categories: the consent agenda, where there's no formal discipline being recommended. Either the cases are recommended for closure or a letter of warning. A second bucket of cases that deal with proposed discipline, where dispositions may include civil penalties or other types of discipline, up to and including revocation. And then a third bucket where we have one case that is a representation of a case previously dealt with by the board, but for which new information may have come to light, or an additional recommendation from staff is coming to light. As a result of the discussions and good questions and commentary from the committee meeting yesterday, where each of these cases were open for thorough vetting, discussion, Q&A, there were a couple of modifications that were made to the legal report that was distributed in person to those who are here today, the members that are here, but also via email, as I understand it, to those that are participating virtually. and I'll deal with those changes as we get to the bucket in which they reside. So our first bucket of cases, known as the consent agenda, where no formal discipline is being recommended, encompasses items 1 through 8 in the legal report. The one change in the facts that was made as a result of the discussions and a comment by Larry Elmore yesterday related to item 1. This was a case where it revolved around the audit requirement or lack thereof for a particular HOA. And in the background to the case, there was language that at one point implied there was an audit requirement and at one point implied there was not. That has been revised to remove the sentence, quote, "the bylaws do not require an audit," in the fact pattern based on the discussions that we had yesterday. So I think that's consistent with the discussions that we had made. That is the only change to the recommendations or backgrounds that I'm aware of with respect to the consent agenda items on items 1 through 8, which are basically recommended either for closure or the issuance of a letter of warning. Generally, when there was a closure recommendation, it's because there either is no sufficient evidentiary matter to get to a point where a violation could be construed, or the respondent was able to basically disprove the allegation in the complaint. So with that, I would bring up a motion representing the legal or the enforcement committee's recommendation that for items numbers 1 through 8 in the consent agenda, that we accept the recommended disposition of those cases.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Larry seconds the motion.
Okay. Discussion? Any discussion? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Renshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Thank you. We'll go on to the next batch of cases that the Enforcement Committee dealt with yesterday, where we were able to make an affirmative recommendation to the board for consideration, and those are items 9 through 11 in what we call the proposed discipline category. That is a category where, generally speaking, some level of proposed discipline or a disposition such as litigation monitoring is being recommended. We had 3 cases in this regard. One involved, item number 9 involved a case where there is litigation ongoing between the complainant and the respondent. So the recommendation there is to place that in litigation monitoring, pending the outcome of the disposition of the suits and countersuits that are anticipated in that particular matter. The second item related to unauthorized disclosure of confidential client information on 3 separate occasions, where information was erroneously and inappropriately disclosed to another client. Information from 3 other clients was erroneously disclosed to another client. The recommendation there is for a $1,500 civil penalty. Let me specifically read the language there. That would be to authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $1,500, essentially $500 penalties for each, one for each of the inappropriate disclosures of information. The next case in that category related to operating without a firm permit. An entity that was soliciting clients and offering to provide services was doing so in a period of time before they had applied for and received their firm permit. This went on for approximately 3 weeks. The recommendation there is for a $650 civil penalty, and formally, that is to authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's payment of a civil penalty in the amount of $650, which is consistent with our disciplinary matrix for this type of a violation, and that matrix was updated and basically amendments to it were adopted at our last meeting last fall. So with that in mind, the Enforcement Committee recommended to the full board that we accept the proposed discipline for those three cases, items 9 through 11. And I would offer that as a motion that we accept that recommended discipline.
Right, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Larry seconds the motion.
All right, any discussion associated with those? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert,
Aye.
Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye. Okay, thank you. We'll now go on to the remaining case item that was in the proposed discipline category that we had significant discussion on yesterday afternoon in the committee, and it was determined at that time that in order to provide staff from the Board of Accountancy, including legal staff, time to do a little bit of additional research to respond to the very good but detailed questions that were put forth in the deliberations and discussions on that matter, that the committee would not take an action as a committee on that case, but would instead present that to the full board this morning, which is what we were about to do. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to just briefly summarize the case situation that we're dealing with, the discussion that took place, and then Neil and staff have had the chance to do some additional legal research, and we have a proposed modified recommendation for consideration and some rationale for that. And so we'll go through that and then open it up for discussion for the full board to vet that and decide how they want to proceed. This particular case, known as item number 12, is actually a function of nearly 20 different complaints against either the individual CPA or the registered firm that the CPA belongs with. And in essence, they kind of break down into 2 or 3 categories. There are approximately 10 individuals who stated that filed complaints that stated they paid for services that were not provided by the respondent. There are also approximately 10 individuals that we know of at this point, and this is a fluid situation, which is kind of going to be part of the recommendation here as well, who entered promissory note arrangements and provided funds to the respondent in exchange for various interest payments and of course, a hope for payment of principal on the funds that were loaned. In many of those cases, the total that we're aware of at this point indicates that funds were provided to the tune of roughly $1.685 million to the respondent. To date, the respondent has paid back approximately $232,000 to the complainants, and there are delinquencies both with respect to interest payments and payments of principal on some or all of the promissory notes that were entered into. There was also one instance of a complaint that he was not paid all the wages due from the respondent at the time his employment ended. So to kind of summarize the sheer volume of the complaints, of the numerous complaints, along with the demonstrated pattern of similar misconduct and respondents' failure to answer the allegations, caused concern from a public protection standpoint. The respondent has so far declined to make a statement or sit for an interview with the assigned investigator due to the advice of counsel. And is asserting his Fifth Amendment rights due to the ongoing federal criminal investigations into his conduct. He is not only facing pending federal investigations, but is also facing multiple civil actions and lawsuits from complainants and others about these matters. As of January 2024, the respondent has voluntarily closed his CPA license with the board and his attorney has indicated that the respondent is willing to surrender his license. The original recommendation that was discussed yesterday afternoon in committee related to providing for a authorization of a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's agreement to basically have his license revoked for a period of not less than 5 years. In other words, the respondent would refrain from attempting to reinstate both his individual and firm licenses for at least a period of 5 years. That was basically the initial written recommendation provided to us yesterday. In response to numerous questions from members of the board and the enforcement committee, there were a number of issues raised. One was, why aren't we recommending a civil penalty with respect to this case? Another was relating to whether or not the board has the authority to enter into an agreement that would require effectively a permanent revocation of individual or firm licenses. And so after our committee meeting and overnight and then earlier this morning, staff had a chance to do some following research with this and also develop some rationales for the recommendation. The revised recommendation is to basically authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via a consent order upon the respondent's agreement to have his individual CPA license and firm permit revoked permanently. In addition, this is not a revision of the original recommendation, and that is to close one of the complaints which was submitted anonymously and for which there is no underlying evidence to create a probable cause situation. So there's a good bit of research going on in terms of what our authorities are in this matter, and also some development of the rationale behind this recommendation, and particularly in terms of the potential consequences if a civil penalty is sought in this particular case. And so what I'd like to do, Neil, is first turn it over to you, particularly on the issue of the permanent revocation. As we discussed yesterday, there was some question because of the nuances in the statutory authority as to our authority as it related to revocation versus refusal to renew. And if you could highlight kind of the viewpoint currently now based on your updated research.
Statute in question yesterday, Mr. Monroe, was essentially it says the board cannot refuse to renew for a period of more than 5 years a license. And that's in the context of suspension. The board may not suspend or refuse to renew a license for a period of more than 5 years. But that does not speak to revocation. So we are on firm footing to proceed with a recommendation that the board revoke permanently. The board is, as a settlement offer, the board is authorized legally, and I confirmed that through research yesterday, that the board would be authorized to offer that as a settlement offer, that if the respondent were to agree to have his firm permit and individual license revoked permanently, then that would be legally sufficient and that would be in compliance with the statutory scheme. So legal has revised its recommendation to you, and we have presented a recommendation that, again, to close the one complaint that's referenced and authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle upon the respondent's agreement to close his firm or to have his firm permit and individual license revoked permanently. Assuming he agrees to it, that would take him out of practice. That would expel him from the profession permanently. Again, as always with these are settlement offers. You're authorizing, in these actions that you take, you're authorizing a formal hearing with the authority that you're granting to me to negotiate with the respondent or his or her counsel to settle. If you make an offer and they don't agree to it, then we go to a hearing. It's a contested hearing with the board and with an administrative law judge. But I believe that this is a fair settlement offer. It does accomplish what we need to accomplish, in my view, from a public protection standpoint. It takes him out of the profession permanently, and it protects the public, and it allows whatever money is left, if any, is there to potentially, have the opportunity for the victims to to recoup that through the various civil actions that we've been told are ongoing and expected to continue.
Thank you, Neil. The other significant discussion point that we had on this case was, should we recommend, as part of a settlement offer, if you will, the imposition of a civil penalty? And the discussion, if I could characterize it, it implied that given the gravity of the potential or alleged offenses, that civil penalty, should be a large one. And so we talked about, our statutory authority basically allows for $1,000 per violation per day. And so depending upon how you calculate it, you could easily, at this point, probably get to a very large, maybe 7-digit number for a proposed civil penalty. But I think Neil and staff also had a chance to kind of noodle through some of the commentary and discussions that we had made there in our questions and answers. And, a couple of factors, and I think I'll turn to Neil and or Duke to kind of highlight any considerations they'd like here, are the relatively low probability that the respondent would be able or willing to pay such a substantial civil penalty. But if he or she were, the fact that would basically be in line with the true victims, the direct victims of his practice alleged violations, that would basically take potential money that they could recoup out of their hands as this thing goes to trial. There are going to be multiple trials, probably from a criminal perspective and a civil perspective. It was mentioned yesterday that many of the complainants are not residents of the state, so that they will have to travel if there is a particular hearing on that. And then you have just the complexity of dealing with multiple victims at the same time that there would be ongoing federal criminal litigation and likely civil litigation going on. And that then, along with the low probability of recovery of a civil penalty, and or if we got it, it would take money away from the victims. I believe it's staff still considered recommendation that we would not, they would recommend that we not impose at this time a civil penalty. Duke or Neil, any further commentary on that?
I'm still of the opinion that I'm not recommending that you assess a civil penalty, and I agree with the assessment that there is a very low probability of recovery, in my view, based on what we know, which again is not going to say we've got the whole picture, because we don't right now. But based on what we know, I think it's very low probability that we would be able to recover anything, or that he would be able to pay. I don't know that for certain. But I would be interested in Duke's perspective, having worked these cases at the federal law enforcement level, on how these typically work out, if you're able to voice any thoughts on that.
Sure. So I won't speak to anything specifically regarding our investigation right here. I'll speak generally in the past of what I've worked with. So, like I said, these cases are often complex and they take a long time. And so what you try to do from a law enforcement perspective is identify your victims and what their potential losses are, and kind of confirm those losses. Sometimes what happens in parallel is creditors could come together and do an involuntary petition to the bankruptcy court. And so these all of our complainants have promissory notes. Obviously, that would make them creditors, right? So they would, if they wanted to, they could probably do a petition before the court, the bankruptcy court, and do an involuntary bankruptcy. And at that time, a bankruptcy proceeding goes. And it's just like a normal bankruptcy proceeding when you voluntarily file a petition. And so then the bankruptcy trustees, obviously, we all know what their job is to do, is identify the assets and then potentially liquidate and then hand them out according to whatever the hierarchy is. I think we all know bankruptcy trustee goes first. I think they get theirs first, and then on down the line. So if a penalty were assessed by the board, I think we'd just be one of the people in line. I don't know where a state penalty would fall within a bankruptcy line versus the other creditors, specifically like our complainants. So that's kind of what our experience is. And I've worked these things for a while, and I've never known a fraud, someone that has committed fraud, to take victims' money, put it on a shelf, and wait for the government to come and get them. Usually collapses in a terrible way. They often, spend undisciplined when they have all this money, and so that's just my experience in the past. And like I said, this is just kind of the early parts for wherever they're at in their investigation. There's just very little they can reveal. They can say there's a case, and that's it. That's all they can communicate. So, but just by looking at what's been going on, my interviews, seeing what's going on out there, I just don't know how much money he has available in terms of our respondents.
Thank you both. And I understand, nobody knows really all the facts around that. And there may be other victims out there that have not filed complaints with us that are going to be in the mix of such a proceeding. David, with your legal background, I guess I would turn to you as a member of the committee, any perspective that you would care to offer.
No, I think generally speaking, our first concern should be protecting the public. And so revocation of license seems appropriate.
Let's at this time just open up to the full board for commentary or questions about the proposed recommendation here in this case. It is, in terms of the sheer number of formal complaints, I think it's the most that I've seen in a single episode since I've been on the board. So it's significant. And I think my sense of the conversation yesterday was that there was a consensus among the committee that revocation needs to take place in one way or another, given the volume and significance. But let's open it up for questions or commentary or other views.
Evan, I know that you learned that act strongly in this case because of the seriousness of it. And that's why we were discussing penalties. I think, though, in essence, this recommendation is really having a stronger impact than direct penalties because the person is losing the means of livelihood. So I think it accomplishes what we wanted to accomplish, even in the penalties, while preserving the status of the complainants.
Thank you, Pam. Other comments or discussion?
This is Janet. Can I speak now?
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm wondering and just want to confirm that permanent revocation precludes this individual from applying to reinstate his license, well, in Tennessee for sure, or in any other jurisdiction. And a second point, is there a way to flag this license to prevent applying somehow to get licensed in another jurisdiction, if that would even be an issue? I guess those, I don't know who could maybe help with that.
Thanks, Janet. I'll speak to the administrative side of things. So if somebody with a revoked license wants to request reinstatement of that license, the first thing we do is grab the consent order or final order from the case for which the revocation was the result. And so as long as the consent order in this situation indicates the permanent revocation without the right to appear or to request reinstatement, then I think that's the safeguard in, if none of us are around in 10 years for that to not happen.
And so we would have to make sure we include in our final decision that he does not have the right to reinstate. I don't think that was currently in what we've been talking about.
Right. So I'll defer to Neil whether that additional language is necessary in term if permanent revocation is used.
I believe that we could add that in. I don't think that that would be legally objectionable if he agrees to it. He's agreeing to it as part of the settlement offer. If he does so, we could add that in, revoke permanently, and at the end, without the right to reappear before the board or request reinstatement.
Okay. Now, what about with other jurisdictions? Would this individual somehow be able to go to another jurisdiction and get licensure without, I guess maybe a reference back to a flag as to what has happened in the Tennessee jurisdiction?
So, Janet, the advantage of the accountancy licensing database that NASBA maintains is the ability to see license status in other jurisdictions. And so I think most boards have a process by which first of all, if you apply for a new license, the individual wouldn't be able to do that because they already have a license. So they would apply for, let's say, reciprocity, and you have to provide, at a minimum, support for the fact that you have an active or you have a valid license in another substantially equivalent jurisdiction. Many states go beyond that, where you have to provide additional information as well. So I think we have a good safeguard there, as far as our public records would all show this licensee as being revoked, and those other jurisdictions would see that information if the individual attempted to apply for a license.
Would we be able to require that the individual wouldn't seek reciprocity in another jurisdiction as part of the settlement agreement? That may be for legal.
Yeah, I'll let Neil speak to that.
I think that would be beyond our scope of what we can do relative to our jurisdiction with Tennessee licensure. I would recommend that.
Okay. The only other comment I would have is that regardless of whether this individual could pay the penalties, particularly since we don't really know what resources this individual might have, I would still be in favor of assessing some penalty and potentially, I don't know, well, I guess if his license is revoked permanently, litigation monitoring might not be necessary, but ensuring that these victims have been made whole, that would be my reason for perhaps monitoring the litigation, particularly if we included some penalties, regardless of, maybe even how long it was held in litigation monitoring.
Janet, thank you for that view. Are there any other comments or thoughts about this matter from other board members?
Chairman Monroe, I think Larry just wants to make sure that once we get to the point of a motion that it's restated very specifically what that is. He has a couple of copies of the legal report and just wants to make sure he understands.
Okay, thank you. We will certainly do that.
Mr. Chairman, it's my understanding that this case has received considerable publicity throughout the state. I know in the urban area in which it occurred, there have been numerous newspaper articles of which I've read on this, and I'm comfortable with our attorney's recommendation from a minimal public protection standpoint that revocation is adequate. However, these reports that I read indicate that the individual in question here is in possession of substantial assets beyond what and the prominence of the firm and the name and the longevity of the firm, it's one of the more egregious, I suppose, violations of public trust that I've ever seen, and it's very disappointing. And for what it's worth, I think for our board to impose a severe sanction is very appropriate in this case.
Thank you, Brad.
Mm-hmm.
Other comments or thoughts?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So I view civil penalties as a deterrent for those wishing and able to continue in practice. So given that this individual in this firm would no longer be able to practice with a permanent revocation, I view kind of that decision from the board as appropriate given the circumstances, and also view any other outcome as potentially overlapping with the civil and criminal cases that will be ongoing. And so I feel that council has recommended is appropriate based on our role from a public protection perspective and monitoring licenses.
Thank you, Sam. Any other comments?
I ask for a clarification from Brad. You said this individual apparently has significant other assets, but you're still comfortable with not levying penalties?
Well, I'm comfortable with accepting our legal counsel's recommendation, and I think from a public protection standpoint, that's adequate. However, reports that I've read in large urban print publications, I recall back in the fall indicated that the individual I know comes from a very well-known firm and background, and indicated, as I recall, that there may be substantial assets in the form of commercial real estate. However, I can't attest to that other than just reading public information that's out there. But that's all that I know.
I think one of the other issues here is, we have to be very careful. There are just a lot of facts out there that we don't know. There may be other victims out there that haven't bothered or been able to file complaints with our board that could also, have a take. And I think we just have to let the federal and civil proceedings play out. But I'm not sure that it's in our best interest to spend the time and effort trying to deal with those complexities, which are probably going to last for at least 4 or 5 years, and with potential criminal penalties and consequences for the perpetrator if he or she is proved guilty. So
I understand things are out there as well, but I would just caution everyone to not make an assessment about what you should or should not do on this case based on media reports.
Fair enough. I think,
Chairman, I see that we've gotten to the point that we can discuss this as at a level to ask if there's any further discussion.
I have an additional comment from Larry. He said he would recommend a significant penalty would be appropriate. Anything less is not fair to others who we have penalized for lesser things in the past.
Okay, thank you.
So we've come down to the point where we say that I sense a direction of the part of the board says that for public trust and protection that we accept permanent. On the other hand, I hear that that may not be enough, that we consider some type of penalty. At this point, I would say that we've had the ability to discuss it. So let's ask for a motion. Which way do you think we should go?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Initially, I would offer up the following motion based on council's recommendation, which is to close the one complaint number 202306347, which was an anonymously presented complaint with no evidentiary matter. And then regarding all remaining complaints, to authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via consent order upon the respondent's agreement to have his individual CPA license and firm permit revoked permanently without the right to request reinstatement. So I'll offer that as the original motion.
Is that the correct wording? And I'll ask, when we get to that point, I'm going to ask Neil to read it back again in the record. But at this point, that's the motion.
That is a motion that reflects legal's recommendation. Yes.
Okay. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
All right. We have a first and a second. Now, discussion. For those who feel very strongly about some type of penalty associated with that, comments? Hearing none.
Mr. Chairman, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think we have two respondents in these cases, if I'm using that term correctly, Neil, because we have complaints against the firm and against the individual licensee.
That's correct.
Correct. So, and I think during our discussion, probably we've been thinking in terms of possible bankruptcy, and I would think that might be the situation with the firm because it was not able to make payroll and so forth. I do have concerns about the individual licensee and possible significant other assets. And I'm 100% for letting the victims recover prior to us, but I do have to think about Larry's concern about how does this penalty or lack thereof compare with what we've done in other cases, and certainly some of Brad's comments about possibility of penalty. And I think you may have been talking about against the individual versus the firm. I'm not sure, but having said all that, I do certainly agree with your recommendation. I just am hesitant a bit without a monetary penalty.
This is Janet. I believe there should be penalties as well. I've not seen a situation like this in the, almost 9 years I've been on the board. So I believe there should be penalties as well.
The only thing I would offer up, and I guess it is Shakespearean because I'm going to quote Shakespeare here, but there's a scene from Julius Caesar where it's like cry havoc and let loose the dogs of war. And in this particular case, if we were to impose a civil penalty, number one, I'm not sure there are enough facts to determine with specificity how it should be calculated. I think you could come up with a huge number if you wanted to. And it will ultimately, I guess, depend upon what settles out in litigation. But secondly, we don't know where this would land up in the pecking order with respect to the victims and their ability to recover. It may be that there's plenty and more left over. It may be that there's not. But we just don't know, based on the representation of staff, where we would ultimately stand in a personal or a firm bankruptcy situation. And the other item is if we try to invoke a penalty here and the respondent is unwilling or unable to pay, then we are going to hearing, and then we are having the attendant costs and consequences of trying to have a hearing in the midst of what will probably be multiple criminal trials and multiple civil actions that are going to play out over years. And I'm sympathetic to the notion of wanting to impose a penalty. That was my very first question to staff when I pre-reviewed the legal report in preparation for our committee meeting. Where is the civil penalty? But after kind of thinking through their initial response back to me and then thinking through our discussion, I think that's very well intended. And on the other hand, I think it's just a greater urgency is to get this person out of practice, because we have to realize he voluntarily closed his license. He could, as Wendy indicated yesterday, reopen it at his discretion, provided he continues to meet the criteria. And if we allow several months or years to elapse before a hearing can be scheduled if he does not agree to the consent order in a hearing, he's out there on the streets able to use the CPA designation. And I find that, more compelling than trying to roll the dice on a large civil penalty.
I have one further comment from Larry that I'll share. He says, I think it could set a precedent for others to do terrible things and then just give up their license and move on. For some, depending on what they benefited from their wrongdoing, it would be worth it to them to do the wrong and just give up the license.
I think the other thing to consider here is that we're not the only ones in play that are going to provide some kind of a restraint or discipline on this person. We're trying to protect the public from a CPA licensure standpoint, but from what staff have indicated, that there are numerous federal criminal investigations and numerous civil actions that are planned here. And so I think, in my view, in response to Larry's very well considered thoughts, we have to look at the overall environment, which is that this person is likely not going to be running away scot-free in terms of personal consequences as a result of the potential consequences of the criminal and civil actions that are going to be chasing him for years, if not decades. And I'm more concerned about getting that license out of there on a permanent basis.
I'd like to say that, going through it, I really want to add some type of penalty to this individual, because I agree with Larry. Respect what our attorney and our investigators are saying, and I respect the motion. The thing that kind of hits me is that from our seat, public protection is what we are charged with. And to allow this individual to possibly come back and activate the license, that's where I have to draw the line and say that this would prevent that. I also have to have trust and faith in the system that the investigators, the attorneys, the judges are going to do their part to ensure that this individual pays and pays at a high price, because we've never had anything like this in the state of Tennessee to this level for the licensed CPA. And so from my perspective, it hurts me to say that to take the penalty off the table, but I think that that's the correct thing to do, just from my personal viewpoint.
Can I say something? Could we put maybe a quicker timeline on the permanent revocation of the license without the right to reinstate? Put a quicker timeline on if he did that with perhaps a lower penalty, and if he doesn't agree to that, then use a higher penalty. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I mean, I think the quicker we could get that license revoked, the better. I agree with that. And some type of penalty, I think that's also appropriate as well, but maybe incentivizing him with a lesser penalty if he goes ahead and agrees to permanent revocation of that license without the right to reinstate.
There will be a timeline. There typically is a timeline for response to these. So kind of that's the forcing mechanism to get the agreement or to get the settlement. And then if he doesn't agree to the settlement after, I believe it's 30 days, he has to respond. And then we would go to a hearing if he didn't, agree to it within that time. But it's a pretty quick timeline of 30 days that is allowed for the responses.
I think the
question... Did we calculate what the penalty would be? I don't think I had ever heard what the potential penalty could be. I thought we were going to look at a calculation of that.
I think one of the complicating factors on that, Janet, is that there are so many cases, individual cases against the firm and the respondent. And as was indicated yesterday, the notes are in various states of either principal default or at least interest default. I mean, you could probably get a number that would be big enough to drive a semi-truck through if you wanted to. But in my view, given all the civil complaints that we are aware of that have already been filed, his ability to have any assets to currently pay a penalty or to even accept that he could pay a penalty is in question. I'm sure liens have been placed or attempted and so forth. I think if we do that, then we wait months ultimately and perhaps beyond that for a hearing date that will satisfy all the parties and the respondents and the complainants, and the person's license is still open if he chooses. It's at his choice, and that's what I keep coming back to. I really don't want him having access to a license.
Well, yeah, and I agree with that. And I guess at a minimum, if we're not going to assess a penalty, then we need to note, in my opinion, why we're not doing that and be very specific about why we're not assessing a penalty.
I'm not sure, Janet, I agree with that. This individual has the ability to accept or decline. And if they decline this agreement, I don't want anything in this to come back and say that we're not going to assess a penalty, a civil penalty in the future once we have a hearing. So I'm sure legal can add to that, but it would seem like to me I don't want to box us in with a statement there.
Well, I mean, I'm not saying where that statement should be. I'm just saying if we ultimately decide we're not going to assess a penalty, then I would just think that it would be useful for future reference to have somewhere in our documentation that would be appropriate and not expose the board to any potential future liability or issues why we didn't assess a penalty, if that's what we ultimately decide to do.
Yeah, I would just say that it's on the record as to the rationale of the board, because this is a public meeting, and that is the record. This is the record. This is the rationale. This is the official record of the proceedings as to the rationale for everything, because it's an open meeting and it's recorded.
5 years from now, is that going to be a record, or however long this might take?
For at least 5 years. I think it goes beyond that. I'm not sure what the time period officially is that video recordings are discarded, but it's at least 5 years.
There would also be the written minutes of this meeting.
Correct.
And also the legal report.
Yeah.
We could certainly note it in the minutes. If the legal report doesn't reflect it, we can put it in the minutes as far as items that were discussed.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Any other thoughts or comments or discussions on this motion? All right, let's check.
I'm sorry. Larry has one more comment. Can we revoke the license now and reserve the right to assess penalties later based on result of legal proceedings? And
we asked that question yesterday, but I'll let Neil answer that.
No, because if he's revoked permanently, he's not even under our jurisdiction anymore. That disposes of the case. He's not a licensee. He's been expelled from the profession permanently. No.
Neil, would you remind us also if we have additional cases come up, say for our next meeting, how do we deal with those if they're of the same nature against the same respondent?
So if other complaints come out regarding this respondent, if he agrees to permanent revocation and he accepts that goes through and he's permanently revoked, if any future complaints came in after that, then they most likely would be closed by operation of law because he's been expelled. The official discipline is revocation for life, permanent expulsion from the profession. He would not be under the purview of the board at that point.
I will add or ask a question here, because previously on disciplinary matters that this board has considered, we typically will look at the status of the license at the time that the violation occurred. So we have in the past disciplined folks that later on may have had an expired license or something of that nature.
I'd have to look into that further, but that's a good point. And if the misconduct occurred while he was a licensee, then maybe there would be potential for something additional. I don't know that you would. I think the same rationale would apply as far as what we've talked about already, that he's been permanently expelled. But that's a good point. If the misconduct occurred while he was a licensee, then we could look at that potentially. But I still think the rationale probably would still, I guess, we would want to deal with it on a case-by-case fact-based inquiry at that point. Yep.
And that is a possibility, I'd just like to say, because in talking to our complainants, they've spoken about being on chat boards and everything else, where there's a lot of other victims that could be out there. It's just they just haven't made a complaint yet. So it's potential that could happen.
So the motion still stands and discussed, as we just did, to permanently take away the firm license and the individual license. And with that, why don't we go out and vote at this point to see if that motion passes? And then if we have a lot of people who are very much in favor of some type of penalty, then we can come back with another motion. But I do like what you just said, Duke, that we might be able to have other complaints that we could come back and then take action on those. And part of me would get excited if they didn't accept this, so that we could have a hearing. We'll start with that and ask Karen to call a vote on this motion.
Mr. Chairman, excuse me, we did indicate that we would do one final read. I think Terry had asked for that of the motion, so if I may.
It was already a second to the motion. Yeah.
So the recommendation is to close complaint number 2023063471 regarding all remaining complaints, authorize a formal hearing with the authority to settle via consent order upon the respondent's agreement to have his individual CPA license and firm permit revoked permanently without the right to request reinstatement.
All right, Karen.
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes no based on the fact that I think a substantial penalty is warranted in addition to revocation.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
I vote no because I think some penalty should be included.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe,
We got him. 2 dissenting votes. Motion passed.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, we have one remaining case left to discuss from the Enforcement Committee's report. That is a representation case, item number 13, where in essence there was, the original recommendation was to place in litigation monitoring because there was ongoing litigation regarding the matter. The new information that's come forth is that it appears that there's been very little movement in the case. There are only allegations at this point which are further denied by the respondent, and so far the evidence does not establish any violation. If further relevant information arises out of the ongoing civil litigation, the complainant may file another complaint. Thus, at this point, counsel recommends closure. And in our discussions yesterday, it was brought out that the complainant, will be made aware that they do have the opportunity to file a further complaint if they deem fit, if they deem it appropriate. So at this point, the recommendation is to move it from litigation monitoring to closure. That is the recommendation of the Enforcement Committee, and I would offer that up in a form of a motion.
Right. We have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Any discussion?
Have we reached out to the complainant to determine that there's nothing going to be going on, or I guess what the status is from the complainant's perspective?
The complainant had stated that he was going to countersue, and our latest information is that he has not countersued, and the evidence that we currently have is not enough to establish a violation, and these matters are still, there still is a lawsuit by the respondent against complainant, but the complainant has not filed the suit as he has indicated that he had planned on doing. So it seems like the can is continuing to get kicked down the road, and without the current status of the evidence not establishing any violation, it seemed to us that closure would be the best course of action.
Any further questions? All right, seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
Aye. That concludes the Enforcement Committee report, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for all your hard work on that, and great job. I know it was tough for the committee and very challenging. I want to thank legal and investigative for your input, and for I know that was tough, and I appreciate it. I don't think we've ever seen anything like that. I think we're all shocked by that, and I hope that that we have some great updates as to what we just passed. So thank you. Next on the agenda is the Executive Committee. The Executive Committee met yesterday. We got an update on travel from Wendy. We also got an up-to-date on our fiscal year 24, noting that, that due to delays and other changes, and maybe even our own new way of renewing, that we are a little bit behind. But the good news is that is starting to come in now in December, and so the action item that we had was the proposed budget for 2025 fiscal year. A lot of discussion was had by the fact that we would possibly be in 3 consecutive years of negative earnings, and that that was due from several circumstances that were beyond our control, that the state initiated, and that the state did not seem to have a problem with us going into our reserve balance for those, even though in the past they've been very stringent on the fact they didn't want to have that multiple years happen. So as chairman of the Executive Committee, I bring forth to you the 2025 proposed fiscal year budget and ask for a motion for approval.
Moved.
And a second.
Second.
And I'll ask Karen to do the roll call on that, which everybody's gotten a copy of. But I'll stop here and say, any discussions on that budget as a board? Seeing none. Karen?
Andy Bonner,
Aye.
Larry Elmore,
Larry votes aye.
Greg Gilbert, Sam Bennett,
Aye.
Janet Booker Davis,
Aye.
Pam Church,
Aye.
David Crenshaw,
Aye.
Brad Floyd,
Aye.
John Griesbeck,
Aye.
Kevin Monroe.
All right. Next on the agenda is updates from different committee members with NASPA. I will tell you that Dan kind of presented a lot of the things that we talked about at the board meeting 2 weeks ago. Obviously, pipeline, ELE, and SPP, and impact is really the forefront of all the discussions. There was a lot of questions that were asked on updates of where everybody is and really where we're going and a timeline. And so I'll leave it at that because Dan did a great job on that. We got updates on CP evolution and all very positive with the changeovers. That was exciting to hear because a lot of years worth of work and talent and committees were very much involved in that, and a lot of people sitting at this table were involved in that. They did come back with a date. I think it's April 11th. I think you're having to think of that. You're approaching in April the 20th anniversary of the first electric automated examination. So I thought that was interesting in the fact that, it's been 20 years since we automated it. And I would say a lot of people at this table were actually with pen and paper sitting in a room twice a year taking the exam. So we've come a long way in the profession, and to say that we were able to change out and take it to another level and update our technology and to have it so far going well is amazing. And so we got detailed information related to that, and that was really good to hear. We also got informed that there would be regional calls with the executive directors and the chairs in February. So I know that is coming up. And, as I said, the biggest discussion item was the pipeline. And so I'm excited about what we discussed and excited about where it's going and really excited about the input and the thought process that's going into it. To help answer the questions that the profession has had related to it. So any other updates from any other committees? I do know that we have a search going on, as Wendy said, for a new CEO of NASPA, and we got an update of where that is. And thank Kevin for all your time and energy, and I know that y'all are doing a great job of researching that and going through resumes and spending a lot of time. And thank you, sir, for all your hard work, because I know it's challenging at this time of the year.
You're welcome. I can't really go much into beyond that other than say process is well underway. The other committee that I'm involved with is the Regulatory Response Committee for NASPA, along with John Griesbeck. And fortunately for us, sometimes the volume of the new pronouncements that we would need to kind of opine upon decreases during what we would used to call formal busy season, which has been a good thing. But the committee actually did meet in person for the first time that I've been on the committee, and as I understand it, prior to COVID. And so we had a good, productive in-person meeting, and what it allowed us to do was to focus on kind of defining our agenda beyond just the inbox of potential pronouncements or exposure drafts that we would typically comment on. And so we spent some time delving into the the planned agendas that the SEC and PCOB and other standard setters have publicly announced, so that we kind of know what's coming down the track a little bit. And that was a very worthwhile exercise, plus just to get a chance to see colleagues in person that you recognize only in a Brady Bunch like Zoom box was helpful.
Andy, I might add to what Wendy has already said in relation to computer-based testing, CBT committee. These topics we have touched on, but they talked about the credit relief program. And I think, did they say 31 states have adopted it? She gave different statistics about which ones were doing it on a case-by-case basis. But
yeah, I do not have those numbers in front of me.
You don't have them in your head. Anyway, but more striking than that, they had some really moving examples. Someone whose mother had passed away and was in a state, I think, where they did, and people who had sort of given up, who had been brought back in and are on track to pass. And so, there was a lot of support for that. And then also they talked about I shouldn't laugh, this was ridiculous. The phone banks were not equipped at NASBA to support all the phone calls they got about the BEC and all the questions, trying to get in there to take it. And so apparently NASBA really suffered quite a bit in those days, and they said it will skew the numbers for quite a while because so many people did rush to take it. And then finally, indirectly, they maybe not part of the plan discussion, but they talked about the pipeline and specific repercussions, like some small firms are having to fire clients because they can't staff the audits. And they specifically said the impact would hit small companies that need audits and not for profits, and someone else had already mentioned in rural areas, but really societal impact. So that's what I had written down.
Thank you. Any other? Wendy?
I will add from the Board of Examiners, with the new exam, of course, there are delayed score releases, but we will be meeting for the first time in person to establish the cut score for the first round of testing in April. So excited to do that, be part of that process, and hopefully there'll be something I can report back to you that might be informative at the next meeting.
Excited to hear that at the board meeting. So,
Mr. Chairman, at the NASBA annual meeting this fall, Dan Dustin did an excellent presentation on the pipeline and workforce. Most of you will probably recall a Wall Street Journal article that said that the profession had lost 300,000 accountants. And then that was followed up, I think, by some reporting by Forbes. And Dan and his team did some extensive research and found that those articles were really based on some Bureau of Labor Statistics data that may have involved bookkeepers and payroll processors and so forth. And the research that you did, Dan, was really phenomenal. And I think the conclusion that you reached was maybe the profession has been flat, but we certainly have not lost 300,000 professionals at this point. Another interesting comment was made by Barry Melanson at that meeting, and let's see if I have the note here. Yeah, he said the top 25 accounting firms generate $110 billion of annual revenue, but a 10% growth factor, which he said that most of the firms were projecting, that's $10 billion in incremental revenues for CPA firms. And he did pose the question, who's going to do that additional $10 billion per year of work if our pipeline is flat at best? So it's very interesting. But Dan, the research you did was, again, phenomenal, and thank you for presenting that.
have to say I agree. It was eye opening as to sometimes statistics doesn't tell all the truth, and Dan really dug down deep to see what it was really saying and where they got their information from, and it really opened my eyes to what is being said may not be the truth. So appreciate that. Any other reports or comments or from any committees? All right, Neil, we've got a legislative update from our legal counsel.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. So the rules that the board, we did the rulemaking hearing in October, if y'all remember, and those rules are with the AG's office currently, and they're under review. So I'll definitely continue to track those and keep you all aware of their progress. Another issue I wanted to bring to your attention is that there is currently a bill that has been proposed, and we're tracking it. We don't know if it's going to pass, but it would make a few changes to the Fresh Start Act, and I wanted to alert y'all to those if it is to pass. One of the things is that it proposes that upon appeal of any Fresh Start Act decision, the standard would be changed to clear and convincing evidence that would need to be proved that the applicant's conviction directly relates to the profession. That's a change from preponderance of the evidence to clear and convincing evidence. Another change is that a number of theft offenses would not be able to be considered for Fresh Start Act purposes if the conviction is older than 3 years or it has been more incarceration. Other aspect of this is that in determining whether the applicant's conviction directly relates to the profession, the licensing authority would only be able to consider a conviction that's a felony or a violent misdemeanor. So that's just a summary of the proposal there in the bill. So I don't know if it's going to pass, but we're watching it, and I will continue to do so and keep you up to speed on that.
Lee?
So, as a reminder, I think we've considered some Fresh Start Act cases at this board. So basically, hopefully I will summarize this correctly, but our statute says that we have the authority to deny a license on the basis of good moral character issues, and that's defined as a lack of felonious activity or dishonest acts. So when the Fresh Start legislation was initially passed, it basically required the board to, we could not automatically deny as a result of those felony convictions. The board would have to review each one of those matters and consider various situations and whether the felony was related to the profession, among the time period of which the felony occurred or the issue occurred, and I think there were 5 or so different things that we had to consider. So these revisions kind of crack down a little bit on some of the things that we can do. And I think one of the most extensive is that something would not have to be reported if it was more than 3 years ago. And so we're talking about fraud cases, those types of things. If it had occurred more than 3 years ago, the individual would not have to report it. We would not consider it. And so that was concerning. Tara, do you want to speak at all about this from a society perspective?
Thanks, Wendy. TSCPA's lobbying team became aware of this proposed legislation earlier this week, and working with some other licensed professions, we are providing language to the bill sponsor that would carve out professions that require a 4-year degree, thereby excluding the CPA profession from the proposed legislation.
And if Kara wanted to stay up there, and since we're going to go to the next level, but I would ask if there are any questions at this point for our legal counsel or for Wendy. All right, Kara, on behalf of the Tennessee Society of CPAs, thank you for all that you do, since I'm a member of that too, but as a board, we're excited to have you here to be a part of our deliberations at this board, and always a smiling face in the audience to be a part of, and we appreciate our communication / relationship with our state society. So I'll give you the floor to kind of update us on anything going on your side, or as an open kind of comment period.
Thank you, Chairman Bonner. I echo your sentiments. We appreciate the great collaboration that we have with the state board at TSCPA, and certainly appreciate Wendy's willingness to travel the state and visit our chapters and provide updates on behalf of the board. We too are following along, just like you all are, on all of the pipeline initiatives. Much of our staff resources and financial resources have been put forth to, hoping to strengthen the pipeline of future CPAs. Appreciate the update from NASBA. I had heard bits and pieces about the proposed program, but it was very helpful to hear more about that today. So thank you for the invitation to be able to listen to that. We will continue to follow along and evaluate all of those opportunities to address the pipeline. But that'll conclude my update. Thank you.
Thank you. Dan had come as a guest to kind of talk about the Professional Licensure Task Force. As we went to break, I asked Dan if he could kind of give us a little update, and specifically about how the transition went within the final months with the testing, the phone call issue that Pam related to, and just kind of give us we did have several calls to the Tennessee Board of Accountancy related to that. I heard everything in the board meeting what happened, and I was satisfied, but I thought that since we had Dan here, it might be appropriate to let him come on behalf of NASBA and kind of give us a quick update of his thoughts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As was discussed, volume during the third and fourth quarters of 2023 was phenomenal. I believe the number is 70% higher year to year. And the infrastructure at NASBA was not set to handle that, especially our phone system, and not making excuses, but also individuals are concerned about getting into the exam, doing their thing. So while you may try to respond to an email or a phone call, they call, and that volume upsets the entire process. So you might have inquiries from the same person 3 or 4 or 5 times, which just throws the upsets the mechanism. The other thing that occurred, we, with the pandemic, moved toward a remote work environment. And we have mechanisms in place to make sure work is getting done. But in retrospect, one of the things we probably would have done was have folks come into the office rather than working at home, so that we had folks there on a certain schedule rather than working during a schedule that they're normally working. With respect to volume in the emergency window, nationwide, there were 27 people who had to test after that December, I believe it was December 15th cutoff. However, only 7 of the 27 actually tested. The others chose not to test. What was interesting was that the last person to test was an accommodation, an ABA accommodation, where we had actually had to have somebody go to across the country to proctor the examination. And there were issues with the equipment that was brought in, and the clock was ticking. It was actually the last day that you could take the exam. We were able to reboot equipment, get that person through to take the exam. So that was a positive from our vantage point. The last thing I would certainly share with you is that, as Chair Bonner suggested, President CEO Ken Bishop discussed this issue at the Board of Directors meeting. He acknowledged it, and he took personal responsibility for it. And I think we'll learn lessons from that and know As you pointed out, it's the first time in 20 years that there's been a significant change. 20 years ago was computer-based testing. This was the first major significant update. The change with the national database, the cutover, everything else went smoothly, perhaps except for that customer service piece, and we're well aware of that. Finally, you had a question about the CRI program. 33 jurisdictions have adopted that program. In addition, Texas and North Carolina have adopted their own program that aligns or mirrors with it. So about 35 jurisdictions right now. A lot of positive outcomes from folks who are part of those 35 jurisdictions where people have come back in and become licensed. Some positive stories out there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you for that update. That was an impromptu kind of update during our break. I would point out, as a board member of NASBA, it was very encouraging to hear and to see how NASBA reacted to it, the lessons learned and the protocols that are being put in place and the changes that are being made, so that if we ever have anything like that again, they think that they have a solution for it. So it was a lesson well learned, and as I said, as a board member, I was very encouraged as professionally how NASBA reacted to it, and I know that some of our members here in Tennessee had some issues getting in there, but if I'm not mistaken, there was almost 5,900 overtime hours worked, and it was just amazing how the staff went above and beyond to answer everything they could, and then the corrections that were made. So thank you very much for that update. Any other comments from the public? Do we have anybody who signed in to make a comment, Wendy, online?
No, nothing in the room or online.
Okay. I guess I'll say, if there's no more business, then I ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All right. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, and I hope everybody drives home safely. I understand that that we didn't see a shadow today, so that might be encouraging. So, thank you.
This meeting is no longer being transcribed. This meeting is no longer being recorded.